Boys, it's only been a few weeks since the college football season started, and for some people, it might already seem as if the sky is truly falling. Clemson has already lost a game. Alabama lost a game in non-conference play at home as well. We also have people asking questions right now. Has the rest of the country catch up to the SEC, citing their record against Power 5 opponents in this early non-conference slate? A lot of questions being asked, some questions being answered, which that is the beautiful thing about college football, because on any given Saturday, anybody can beat anybody. Ask that favorite team of yours that was a free 4-touchdown favorite and has lost, maybe even this season. Not naming any teams, but you know exactly who you are. We may only have one show here over the course of this week, but we got quite a bit going on in this particular show here tonight on this Monday morning, remembering the unfortunate tragedy of 9/11, as that is when I am recording this podcast. I got a new Any Given Saturday top 25 coming out to you guys. Not as much major movements as last week, but definitely want to bring that to your attention to let you know, what does the model think in terms of how teams should be ranked at this portion of the season, now that we have a few weeks of data to work with. I also got some game recaps. We're also going to talk about a couple of top 25 games that happened. Tulane and Ole Miss, Texas and Alabama. We already know that we're going to, of course, spend some time talking about all of that. And another game in which surprised me the most, but maybe many of you weren't paying attention necessarily. So I'm going to bring that to your peripherals as well. We don't have any top 25 matchups this week either, but even though we may not have any top 25 matchups, some of which would consider be worthy of watching for college football playoff implications, there's still some good games out there, games in which could have some immediate impacts on the AP poll when that does get rolled out this time next week. I'll bring those games to your attention as well. But guys, I am excited for today's Any Given Saturday podcast. We are hitting a little bit of a milestone over here, podcast number 10. So we actually have the audacity to not just hit it and quit it. We are actually sticking around and hanging strong here in this first ever college football season here on the channel. So hope you guys are ecstatic about today's pod that should be released on the morning of September 12th. That's when you guys should be able to view it for the very first time. Guys, real quick though, before I jump into this any further, I do need you guys to go ahead and do me a couple of favors real fast. Well, free depending on who you're asking. First and foremost, please do me the favor and hit that like button for me, because when you hit that like button, what you are doing is, number one, first and foremost, you're telling me that you enjoy the content that you're watching, this college football content. So any way that you can go ahead and bring that back, go ahead and hit that like button for me. And also, 98% of you guys, I'm looking at the watch time from subscribers right now over the last month. 98% of you guys that are watching this podcast right now on YouTube have not subscribed to the channel. I mean, you guys are coming around, you guys are coming through and having a good time. Guys, let's not make this rocket science. Hit that subscribe button for me, and you have an opportunity to be an OG, to be a day one in doing so. We're sitting at 26 subscribers as of the recording of this pod. We would always love the opportunity to continue to grow here tonight. And of course, you guys already know that I always read your guys' comments in the comment section. So if there's a particular game in, let's say, next week, in week number 4, that you guys want me to go ahead and take a look at and give my thoughts on, or even if there's a game that happens this weekend, let me know down in the comment section. I'll certainly spend some time looking at it, and I do take the time to make sure that your comments are heard. You guys are heard and validated. I hear you guys out over here. We're not elitists over here. We are a college football show that is made for the people, by the people. So that being said, should be a great one. Hope you guys are excited for this podcast. Let's just go ahead and dive right into it, as we had some good college football games over the course of this past weekend. Ole Miss and Tulane, Texas and Alabama was a really good game as well. Shoot, even if you want to look into the non-top 25 matchups, Oregon and Texas Tech, for example, was really good. Wisconsin got upset by Washington State. So, a little bit of movement, and rightfully so, in that AP poll. What does the Any Given Saturday poll, what does the computer model think of this? So let's not waste any more time with that. Let's go ahead and jump right into that. Jumping into the top 25. Now, in this Any Given Saturday top 25, let me just say this. Not as many new teams entering the top 25 as what we saw in the AP poll that was released on Sunday during the 1 o'clock games for the NFL, for those of you that do happen to follow the NFL as well. Both of those teams will show up here initially on your screen right now. We got 21 through 25. We do have a couple of teams in here. Iowa, they had a pretty convincing win against Iowa State. Still have some concerns about their offense, but we do know that Iowa has one of the best defenses in the entire country. I don't think anyone is disputing that. I do have them back into the top 25. Had them ranked, I believe, in week number 1 going into the season. But yeah, Iowa fell out during week 2. They are back once again. They are remaking an appearance in here at number 24 in the country. And then we have another team that happens to be entering in the top 25 as well. We got the Auburn Tigers. Yes, they are going to go ahead and make an appearance here. Auburn comes in ranked number 21 in the country. They perform above expectations against UMass. UMass, maybe they might be one of the worst teams in college football, but they're certainly more exciting to watch than last year, those of you that have actually had time to watch UMass. And then Auburn went across the country, took on the Bears of California, and it was a defensive-minded battle, but what this game tells me is that Auburn knows how to win in multiple ways. And, if you're an Auburn fan, I think that's the best that you can hope for. Auburn got a nice win, and because of that, they're in this top 25 for the very first time. The model does have them as the number 21 team in the country. Now, before I go into this top 25 poll for Any Given Saturday, I do want to point out that these are not rankings. These are power ratings. And what these power ratings are, this is just simply to determine if these two teams would play right now, playing today, who would be favored over whom in a neutral site field. Now, we do have more data as we are a few weeks into the college football season, but still a lot of the preseason still being identified, as many teams have played only a couple of games at most. It's still very early on in the season. So that caveat is out of the way. We'll jump into the rest of the top 25 because of that. UCLA in at number 20 in the country. UCLA finally getting ranked in the AP poll, but for those of you that have been following this show for quite some time, we have had UCLA ranked since the very beginning. We were high on what Chip Kelly has going on over here in UCLA. Maybe the little brother in Los Angeles right now because of what the Trojans are doing, but UCLA is still a very good football team. They're here in the top 20. And then I have Miami moving up to number 17 in the country in my power ratings model. Now, I did not get a chance to preview this game. There was gonna be a second show last week, and unfortunately, life does happen. And because life does happen, we weren't able to get that second show up in a timely manner without rushing in. And I don't want to send a bad product over in your directions, but say that because we were going to preview that Miami and Texas A&M game. The model actually did have Miami winning. And turns out the model was right. So, got to give a pat to the back to the old model right there. They're up at number 17 in the country. And then Oregon, they survived a dogfight against Texas Tech. They're chilling at number 16 right now. Now, conversely, we go into the top 15 and what we have here. And we have the team that fell the most in this Any Given Saturday power rating poll without actually falling out of the top 25. Alabama was ranked number 2 in the country last week, but as you may know, they did end up losing to Texas at home, and in the fashion that Alabama lost to. The poll does not believe in what it used to be, in what Alabama used to mean and used to represent. Certainly some concerns about James Milroe. We'll dive into this later on in the pod when we talk about the Texas-Alabama game specifically. but I do have Alabama falling minus 10 spots. Now, rounding out the this 11 through 15, I got Tennessee right above them. They didn't look as impressive as I thought they were going to look versus Austin Peay down the FCS level, but a win is a win. I'm not going to penalize a team for beating an FCS squad. Now, if they lost, that's a different story. And we did have 3 FCS teams beat an FBS program last weekend, but Tennessee was not one of them. Now we go into the top 10 real fast. Texas was my biggest riser, of course. I don't think anyone is surprised by that. I moved them up 5 spots. They were at number 14 in the country. Now they're up to number 9 based off of their performance this past weekend. Now, why I don't have them up over the teams that are ahead of the other 3 teams listed, and this is what the model thinks. For Utah, we still haven't seen what Cam Rising can do with this offense, and even with a backup quarterback in the game, they still find a way beat Florida, and then they went on the road to take on Baylor, which, yes, they lost to Texas State, and it was embarrassing, but Baylor was in wounded animal mode, and they still almost found a way to win that game. So Utah, very quality football program. I have them at number 8. Penn State at 7. I think Drew Allar could very well be the truth. I think he's looked very good thus far. And then Oklahoma. They've won in multiple ways in both of the games that they played versus Arkansas State and SMU. They have covered both of their games. Oklahoma, of course, dog walking Arkansas State to oblivion, almost made Butch Jones cry. That is a special thing to do. And then SMU, they shut down SMU's offense. I thought it was going to be one of those games where that game was going into the 70s in terms of total points scored between the two teams. Wasn't remotely close. Oklahoma was still able to cover. So for now, the commuter model does have Oklahoma at number 6 in the country. Finally, we have our top 5. We do have a new number 1 team in the country, but it's not who I think was going to be. Florida State is my new number 1 team in the country, and according to the Any Given Saturday computer model, Florida State has looked extremely scary. So is the other 2 teams on this list, right? So Florida State, they have really came out and showed very early that they are a team to be reckoned with. Florida State, of course, sending a massive message to LSU in that neutral site game in week number 1. But secondarily, what we've also have seen as well is, in that follow-up game against Southern Miss, they didn't have that letdown. Sometimes when you have teams that pull off an emotional win like Florida State did in week number 1, we sometimes see that letdown, and that just didn't happen. They dominated Southern Miss from the start, won 66-13, and it's a scary football team. It is an extraordinarily scary football team right now, and so are the other 2 teams that are in this top 5. USC, I think, is starting to figure things out on defense. Stanford, couldn't really find a way to score even in the garbage time. They only get 10 on the USC Trojans. We all know what Caleb Williams can do. I'm not going to dive too deep to that. We know Caleb Williams is certified him. And then Notre Dame. Notre Dame, I feel like this is a different team from last year. I felt this way right after the Navy game, and I feel like that was confirmed to a degree in that matchup against North Carolina State. Had to traverse through some weather delays, a lot of bad weather from the Carolinas up to the northeastern part of the country. One game in which was delayed 6 hours. So you hate to see that. Notre Dame is number 3 in the country. And as for Washington and Georgia, it's not that I think less of those 2 teams. Actually, they are roughly the same rating as they were last week. It's just Florida State, USC, Notre Dame, those types of teams, they continue to look even more impressive. And that just goes to how much more highly I think of those 2 teams instead of concerns that I may have for Washington and in Georgia. So that is my Any Given Saturday top 25. Of course, one thing that I do like about this model that we've built, and it's going to get better as we are presented with more information, is that it does tend to react more like honey instead of water. We're not going to freak out and put a team suddenly in the top 25 that would have no business being in there prior to a big game, right? So that's what I really like this model. It just gives a good idea of who would be favored over whom if these two teams played today. So that's going to round things up for the Any Given Saturday Top 25. Only a couple of new teams in. Texas A&M, they're out. They are no longer in there. Can't remember exactly who the other team was that fell out of the top 25. I'm going to see if I can find my list real quick to see if I can find who I'm looking for. Oh, yeah, Wisconsin also fell out after their loss to Washington State. Had the over on them, and it fell just short. If only Wisconsin made that 2-point conversion. We'll cry through the pain. It is what it is. But let's get away from this model for a quick second, and I want to take a chance to there we go. Get a little drink from the glass real quick. Make sure to stay hydrated. I know that it's getting cooler. We're getting that premium football season weather right now, and you absolutely love to see that. But just a general rule of thumb: stay hydrated, kids. That's all I'm asking for you. I'm not asking from too terribly much. At least I'm not hoping so. But it would be too much to ask for Tulane to win without their starting quarterback. Ole Miss and Tulane, we had a top 25 matchup, and a rare occasion where we saw an SEC team go on the road to take on said top 25 team. Ole Miss comes in ranked number 20 in the entire country last weekend, and they took on a Tulane team that, looked pretty good against South Alabama. They remained in the top 25. They were ranked number 24 in the entire country. Now, in this game, we did end up seeing Ole Miss end up pulling it out. It was 37-20. That was what the final score at least appeared to be. As I want to make sure that wasn't anybody important. Here's the thing. We always talk about games and situations and where there's always the type of games, right, where the score looks more lopsided than what the score actually, or how the game actually felt, right? So how about some surprises first and foremost? I mean, we had Ole Miss, and Ole Miss, they are very darn good at running the football. That has been the MO since Lane Kiffin has came to Ole Miss specifically. And in spite of that, what we ended up seeing was Ole Miss was held to less than 100 yards rushing. They were held to less than 3 yards a carry. It was actually kind of impressive to watch the Tulane front seven go to work here. And this ended up becoming a Jackson Dart game where Jackson Dart had to made some big plays with his arm. So how did Ole Miss end up winning this game? How did that end up happening? Well, first and foremost, you have to point towards the turnover battle, okay? So Tulane did end up losing the turnover battle in this one. We saw, their backup quarterback, Kai Horton, throw an interception. Wasn't a great day for him. Only 40% completion percentage, 15 for 37, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. Wasn't what you would love to see, but that's what you got. Also, he had 10 carries for negative 28 yards, too. That's also not remotely pretty by any means. We did also see surprisingly good pass rush by Tulane. Tulane had 4 sacks. Ole Miss did end up with 4 sacks, too. So very good pass rushes from both of these teams here. Jackson Dart just found a way to get it done at the end of the day. 17 for 27, 267, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. I'm going to go ahead and say the quiet part out loud. Michael Pratt did not play in this game once again. He didn't play. He was questionable to play coming in. He was a game times decision. In the Southern Alabama game, he was absolutely brilliant. 14 for 15, 294 yards, 4 touchdowns. Fortunately, got hurt in the game, though. He was a game time decision. And unfortunately for him, they just couldn't find a way to figure out how to get Pratt healthy enough to actually play in this game. because the defense really did all that it could, but it just ran out of gas towards the end, and that's just a reality of being a group of five team. You know, you may have a similar level of high end talent. I mean, Michael Pratt is a very good quarterback that could have NFL aspirations. We also saw this with Tyjae Spears. Tyjae Spears is, of course, in the NFL. He's with the Tennessee Titans now. The depth is not the same at a group of five level as it may be at, say, an SEC school, like Ole Miss, for example, right? So that showed in the second half. I mean, you remember how we were talking to how this game was a lot closer than what the score would ultimately indicate? Well, that was a perfect example of that. We saw 20 of Ole Miss's 37 points come in the fourth quarter alone. This was a 7-point game with less than 3 minutes left to play. But we saw Ole Miss get a field goal with 2 minutes left, and then we also saw them get a fumble return. That was the second turnover, and that was the ultimate dagger that unfortunately did lead to Ole Miss winning 37-20. Now, if you're Ole Miss, you're feeling good. You know, you may have not played your very best game, but you still did find a way to win the game ultimately. And Tulane, like that environment was ready. That was a really good environment that Tulane was able to produce on national television. So hats off to Tulane for that. So let's go ahead and take a quick look at what Ole Miss has in store and what does Tulane have in store moving forward. What do we got to look forward to between these two teams as we continue to progress through the rest of the season? Now, for Tulane, this is going to be the toughest game that Tulane will play the entire year. This unfortunately does mean that Tulane will likely not get looked at to make the college football playoff. Historically, there has never been a group of five team that has made a college football playoff without going undefeated. Even then, Cincinnati had to go undefeated in the regular season 2 years in a row in order to at first get respect from the committee and then ultimately get that final hurdle and be the first group of five team to make a playoff. So for Tulane, that's no longer in the question. We do, however, see they are going to play against Southern Miss. Southern Miss still, I believe they're still in the American Conference now. If I'm not too terribly mistaken, they could be in Conference USA though. Let me just double check real fast. I'm not like 100% sure. Okay, so Southern Miss is in the Sun Belt, so it's a non-conference game still. So they'll have two more non-conference games at Southern Miss, and then they have an FCS opponent. Okay, they play Nicholls State. Then they'll get into their American Conference schedule. The only game that I see on Tulane's schedule that could give them some trouble is UTSA. And even then, UTSA hasn't came out the gate nearly as hot as maybe you would like to see UTSA come out the gate. So Tulane should be favored in every other game that they play in this season, and they can easily work themselves back into the top 25. As for Ole Miss, though, Ole Miss does have the pleasure. They needed this win because it is going to get a little bit tougher. They have a gauntlet coming up here towards the end of September. They'll have Georgia Tech, and they should be favored over Georgia Tech. That's going to be a home game. No one too terribly concerned about that. But then they'll have Alabama on the road for their first conference game in SEC play. Now, we have seen Alabama be vulnerable, and I'll talk about those vulnerabilities a little bit later. But for Alabama, they are in what I would consider wounded animal mode. And speaking of wounded animal mode, LSU kind of in that same spot as well. Maybe we dive into that later. Maybe not. We'll have to see what games I want to preview specifically. But Ole Miss is not going to have easy games on his hands either way. So anytime that you can get a game in the bank like this on the road, hats off to Ole Miss, getting the job done. They remain undefeated, and they'll close out conference play or non-conference against Georgia Tech, at least for right now, as they'll prepare for SEC action. Speaking of the SEC, though, speaking of that SEC that we saw earlier, we saw the SEC featured in another top 25 matchup as well. This one being Texas. Texas on the road took on Alabama, and what we saw from Texas is, listen, when these two teams went together in Austin, this was a much closer game than what people expected. Bryce Young had to carry them down the field for a last-second field goal, and Alabama won on that last-second field goal. This game, now Texas was able to get a recalibration of expectations. Since then, Texas now finds itself on the road, taking on the Alabama Crimson Tide, and we had some what ifs answered in this game. Quinn Ewers, if you remember what happened in the first meeting between these two teams last season, what we saw between these two teams was Quinn Ewers got hot. He got hot early in that game in Austin, but unfortunately got hurt in the first quarter, and he wasn't able to get on the field since then. Backup quarterback came in. Texas offense couldn't really do much, if anything. Alabama won that way. This time, we saw Quinn Ewers play a little bit longer. And this time, we saw the Texas Longhorns have their starting quarterback for the entire game. And that seemed like it was the difference, if that makes sense. So Texas wins 34-24 in this game. And I think it speaks to how far Texas has come as a program under Steve Sarkisian. It also could mean a downfall of a dynasty. I mean, we've seen Alabama dominate college football throughout the 2010s. And now here we are in 2023. We're in this era of NIL. We got transfer portal, all of this stuff going on right now in our college football universe. And, Alabama, they had some issues at quarterback. So what I was concerned with, granted, their defense was supposed to be pretty good, and we saw what that could mean in their opener against Mid-Tennessee State. But if they were in a shootout, can James Milroe do enough to keep Alabama in the game in these shootouts? And we got our answer. Or at least I think we got our answer, right? I think the answer is no. Now, is this all on James Milrose? No, I don't think that it's all on him. I think there's some things that could have been done offensively from a play calling perspective that could have benefited James Milrose a little bit more. For example, Milrose, he's not known for being that traditional drop back quarterback. He's more of that dual threat athlete who can really make plays with his legs if given the opportunity to do so. The problem is he wasn't really given the opportunity to do so. Alabama went to drop back like they were typically passing the ball. And, Texas defensive line got home. They ended up with 5 sacks in the game. That's, not a good day at the offense for the Alabama offensive line. 9 TFLs to go with it, too. It was a rare time that we saw Alabama be vulnerable. I can't remember the last time Alabama has been vulnerable, right? And it's not just the disadvantage that Alabama had in the trenches. I mean, think about it. When have we seen a game in the 2010s that Alabama had the disadvantage in the trenches in that game? We haven't. Alabama has always dominated in the trenches. Every single game that they played in, it seems like. And it didn't happen today. It did not happen in that particular game. And James Milroe paid for it. 5 sacks that he took in the game. Meanwhile, on the other end, Quinn Ewers had time. Quinn Ewers was not brought to the ground the entire time in the game. No sacks recorded by the Alabama front seven. You hate to see it. And Quinn Ewers went off in this game. This is the type of game that people thought could happen if he played in that entire game last season down in Austin. Quinn Ewers ended up going 24 for 38, 349, 3 touchdowns through the air. That's what I like to call getting that job done. Period. End of story. Quinn Ewers got it done, man. But it's not just about him. I mean, the offensive line created some running room, or at least a decent amount of running room to at least keep him honest. There wasn't a lot of running room available in this game. Both teams barely had over 100 yards rushing. Texas tried to run it a tad bit more. They were 0.3 yards less per carry than what Alabama had, but Alabama wasn't getting much going on the ground either. But another thing that we saw was a couple of other key factors that ended up allowing Texas to come back and win this game. Because remember, Alabama was actually leading going into that fourth quarter, okay? They were leading going into the fourth quarter. Alabama was once again undisciplined. Texas had 4 penalties that ended up going for 40 yards. Alabama, 10 penalties, 490 yards in this game. It was atrocious for the Alabama Crimson Tide. And when you have penalties like that, there's certain things that you can fix up over the course of the season. But penalties were an issue last year. So it makes you wonder if it can be fixed over the course of the year, because we know Alabama's got tougher teams that they got to go up against, or at least as tough as Texas. Ole Miss being one, Tennessee could be one, LSU could be one as well. And if they even make it to Atlanta, they probably Georgia's waiting for them on the other side. And at least be another top 25 team. Won't be easy navigating for the Crimson Tide. It certainly won't. So what now? Where do we go from here? If you're a Texas fan, by the way, you're probably through the roof right now. The path is clear for you to make it to the college football playoff. You got Wyoming, and we'll talk about that game a little bit later, possibly. And then we'll jump into Big 12 conference play. Alabama, next time out, you go on the road for the first time this season, but you're going on the road against South Florida. Don't know how South Florida was able to get Alabama into their off-campus stadium, but they found a way to make that happen. So, a great win for Texas. This is a signature win that college football playoff committees are talking about when it comes down to where's that signature win. And I think Texas had that signature win Saturday night against Alabama in Tuscaloosa. And Quinn Ewers, not a lot of talk of him about a Heisman Trophy. Maybe not as much as Travis Hunter, Shadir Sanders, those types of guys. But Quinn Ewers, don't get mistaken, he had his Heisman moment too Saturday night. And if Texas does make the college football playoff or remains in the conversation, Quinn Ewers could be hoisting that trophy too. So Texas, they played more disciplined football. That was the biggest difference in this game, being more disciplined than Alabama. And because of that, Alabama got their first loss of the season. Now, there was another game that I wanted to bring your guys' attention. Those are the two big ones, Ole Miss, Tulane, Texas, and Alabama. But I always like to talk about games that maybe, I don't even want to say under the radar, but games that just completely not even remotely getting any attention, unless maybe you're a fan of these particular schools, or maybe your favorite team is in the same conference as one of the two teams that are featured in this matchup. That type of thing, right? And it's the UTEP versus Northwestern game. Now you're going to see the score of this UTEP and Northwestern game, and you're thinking to yourself, Jake, what are we doing here? Why are we talking about UTEP and Northwestern? Well, let me tell you. It may not seem very surprising on the surface, Northwestern beating a small group of 5 school by 30 points. It doesn't seem that surprising on the surface. We want to talk about the disrespect to Northwestern football, and I've noted there's a lot of negative energy around this program. There's a lot of negative energy around Northwestern football because of what happened to their longtime coach, because of the hazing incidents that were not acceptable to that Northwestern administration. So they're starting their new coaching search now. There's going to be an interim in there for the time being. But we want to talk about some disrespect. So when the lines opened up, this was on FanDuel. This is what I primarily use for college football betting purposes. UTEP was actually the favorite to win. UTEP was a 1.5 point. It's not a big favorite, but they were a 1.5 point favorite over Northwestern. Like, oh, how the mighty have fallen. Like, listen, I get it. Northwestern looked terrible in their opener against Rutgers. They did not look good. They did not score until the closing moments of that game. But UTEP lost to a team that's making a transition up to the FBS level. They lost to Jackson State. They didn't look great against Incarnate Wood, but they won that game. But I mean, this is not even the best team in Conference USA. And I think that's the worst conference in FBS football right now. And you decide initially to favor UTEP over Northwestern. Now, just why? I wish I had like inside knowledge of the folks that decide where the lines are set up and how those decisions are made. I got some questions. I certainly have some questions for sure, right? Eventually, by the time the game did kick off, we did have some common sense into the picture. Northwestern did eventually be favored, still not by much, half a point. They were a half-point favorite by the time this game kicked off initially, according to FanDuel, by the way. And it was close. It was close in the beginning. It was tied going into half, but then Northwestern came out in the second half, and they ended up with 31 unanswered points. And that's how they won by 31. But a 30-point win is a 30-point win, especially if the game is initially supposed to be a toss-up. It was initially supposed to be a toss-up in the beginning. But how did they get it done? How did Northwestern get it done? Turnovers, turnovers, turnovers. That is the $1 million key in this one, ladies and gentlemen. It's all about the turnovers. Northwestern did not turn the ball over at all in the game. They did a much better job of taking care of the ball than what they did against Rutgers. That's what really killed them in that game. Ultimately, they weren't able to come back after that. No turnovers for Northwestern. They forced 3 turnovers on the other end on UTEP. 2 of which were by their starter, Galvin Hardiston. He's the starting quarterback for UTEP. He was not great. He hasn't been great in FBS games. 2 touchdowns, 4 interceptions in 2 such games. He was a little bit more efficient, though, but a very average group of 5 quarterback. Average. And that's not even to say that Northwestern's offense looked that great either. Ben Bryant, 11 for 17, 116 yards, 1 passing touchdown. You know, we took care of the ball, and, you know, he has college football experience playing at Cincinnati, Eastern Michigan, and now at Northwestern. But he didn't have those eye-popping stats, right? There was nothing eye-popping about this particular game offensively. But they were able to establish the run game a lot better. They averaged close to 5 yards a carry. That's great by Northwestern standards. And yeah, they just took good care of the ball. And I'm happy for Northwestern, man, with all the negative energy around that program right now because of what their previous head coach did. It feels good to not only win your first game of the year, but also simultaneously winning big and not even being, not necessarily counted out, because Vegas did change it to where they were going to be favored to win. But to be 1-point favorite over UTEP baffles my mind. And I'm glad Northwestern came out. Definitely proved some people wrong here tonight. You absolutely love to see it. So enough talk, though, about the past. We spent some time talking about the past. We spent some time talking about the poll. But some people would say this upcoming college football weekend is going to be a dud. And the reason people say that this is going to be a dud is because there's no matchup that features 2 top 25 teams playing against each other. But I would certainly argue that even though you're right, there may not be any top 25 matchups happening this weekend, but I still think there's a few good games out there. I still think there's some games out there that warrant your attention and could have an immediate and direct impact on the AP poll. because even though there's not two top 25 teams, these are all teams that are receiving votes in the AP poll. So that all that considered, there's 3 such games that I wanted to bring up and spend some time talking about here tonight. Let's jump into that first one. We talked about that wounded animal and what it's like to be in that wounded animal state. LSU is one such wounded animal. Last time that we saw them play a meaningful game, they played against Florida State. We saw them get absolutely embarrassed on national television. In prime time TV, we saw LSU get embarrassed. And because of that, we saw them fall from their initial top 5 ranking. Now they're down to number 14 in the entire country. The team that they're going to play up against, though, maybe not a wounded animal, but it certainly has some things to prove. Mississippi State, undefeated right now, 2-0. They have an FCS win against Southeast Louisiana, and then their most recent game against Arizona. They beat Arizona, but not looking impressive against Arizona, if that makes sense, right? Because Mississippi State actually had to go to overtime at home in order to beat Arizona. So while the Bulldogs are not in the same wounded animal mindset that maybe LSU would be, we do have Mississippi State. They got some things to prove. They want to prove to themselves that they can be a team that could at least make some noise in the SEC East. I think I got that right. I think that's where, no, not the East, the West. Wow, I'm bad, absolutely terrible with my geography. That is on me. So this is an SEC West divisional matchup. So this could have a direct impact later on in terms of who goes to Atlanta at the end of the year. Not very many people have Mississippi State going to Atlanta. They were actually picked to finish last in the SEC West this year, but I still think Mississippi State could certainly be a team that, could make that race a little bit interesting, maybe be that ultimate spoiler. So let's dive in. So this game is going to be in Starkville, Mississippi. This will be played at Davis Wade Stadium on Mississippi State's campus. We'll go ahead and check out what the game line is, and we'll also check out what the any given Saturday model looks like. So right now, the game line as of Monday morning, LSU was favored by 9.5 points, but the model thinks this game is going to be a little bit closer than 9.5 points. Right now, the model has still LSU winning, but maybe it's a closer game than what would be expected. LSU only favored by 8 points according to that any given Saturday model. So we've seen these two teams really being able to move the ball downfield. LSU has averaged over 500 yards of total offense per game. Mississippi State, not too bad either. Kind of away from what we saw under the late, great Mike Leach. Rest in peace to his soul, who absolutely deserves to be in the College Football Hall of Fame, by the way. It's a little bit different offense than maybe what you would see under Mike Leach. Still an effective offense, though. They ran for over 200 yards rushing in their first couple of games against Southeast Louisiana and Arizona as well. They're led by their tailback, and their tailback, Jaquavius Marks. He's a dangerous running back, man. He is absolutely dangerous. On track to having a career year, by the way. Never ran for more than 600 yards in a year. He's on pace right now to run for over 1,200 yards. We'll see if he can keep that up, but he's on pace to run for over 1,200 yards this season. That's how good he's been. And we also know about Mississippi State's quarterback, Will Rogers. Will Rogers still hasn't thrown an interception yet this season. 33 for 46, 390 yards, and 5 touchdowns. We know that he can swing the rock around. We've seen this under Mike Leach. We've seen this under this new coaching staff as well. So Will Rogers, maybe not someone that you think of right away as one of the best quarterbacks in the SEC, but he's certainly an experienced quarterback. So how does this upset happen? Well, it's going to be a similar formula than maybe what we saw how Florida State was able to beat LSU. Because how did LSU lose to Florida State, right? How does that happen? Okay. So you got to get to this quarterback, man. You got to get to Jalen Daniels. We'll see if they're capable of doing that. Florida State had 4 sacks. So pass rush really got to step up for Mississippi State in order to pull this off first and foremost. You also need Will Rogers, I think, to have your best game of the season. You haven't needed Will Rogers to throw the ball that much. You're averaging 20 free attempts a game. I think this is a game where Will Rogers will need to throw the ball a little bit more, because I could see this being a little bit more of a high scoring game. The over that I'm seeing right now is at 53. I think could be more than that, because Mississippi State, we know what they can do stopping the run. They've been really effective stopping the run so far, only allowing 87 yards a game. But that's not really LSU's MO. That is more in their passing game, and they have some dynamic players on the outside too. So get to Jalen Daniels. And if you can get to Jalen Daniels, you can at least disrupt the passing game enough to where you have a shot to win this game. And on top of that, Will Rogers, he's got to come to play, man. I think this is going to be the most attempts that he's going to have in this ball game. He's been able to do it in spots in the past. If he can't rise up to the occasion, LSU could certainly roll by any means. But what do I think is going to happen? Do I agree with the model? Do I agree with Vegas? Where do I stand in all of this? I think LSU does win. I think that LSU, it's just too talented of a football team to start the year 1-2. I truly think it is. That Florida State game left a tough pill to swallow, but I think they got their swagger back. They got that get-right game that they were looking for. And Mississippi State, we'll see if they can continue to hang with LSU. But the idea of Arizona going to overtime with you just doesn't really sit right with me. So I'm going to go with LSU. I don't think that it's going to be a game where LSU covers, but I think that LSU is going to win this game, though. I feel pretty confident in that. So speaking of teams that are down south, though, we now go to Minnesota, a game that features yet another top 25 team, but not multiple top 25 teams. Got North Carolina. North Carolina is ranked number 20 in the country. They did so. They've been in the top 25 the whole year so far. They beat South Carolina. And then they had a scare against Appalachian State. And Appalachian State, it doesn't matter what the model says. When you're playing Appalachian State in a non-conference game, look out. Things could get really crazy. When North Carolina went to App State last fall. It ended up being like 63-61. They take on another team that's 2-0 and is receiving some votes in the top 25 right now. And that, my friends, is the Golden Gophers of Minnesota. Minnesota is 2-0. And what's very clear right away, Minnesota at least looks sound on defense. They looked apart defensively. They held Nebraska to 10 points. They held Eastern Michigan to 6 points. So, to at least the defense for Minnesota is at least the floor is decent, right? You don't hold teams to under 10 points or at 10 points and just be god awful. But we're going to really find out how good is Minnesota's defense actually is. Because North Carolina can put points on the board. This will certainly be the most challenging offense that Minnesota is going to have to go up against. And keep in mind, while Drake May is an NFL prospect and many people do have him as like the quarterback 2 in this draft, behind Caleb Williams, of course, Drake May doesn't have like his stats. They're not as great as you would think they would be, to be honest with you. So like Drake May, 45 for 62, 477, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. So you would think that Drake May would have more eye-popping stats at this point in the year. We just haven't seen that yet. Now, does he get it together in this game? I don't know. I'm not sure, because 2 things could be true. Minnesota's defense could actually be good, but North Carolina still finds a way to put quite a few points on the board. Or Drake May doesn't have the same type of help than maybe you would anticipate him having, and that explains why he hasn't had maybe as good of a season as maybe some people would have imagined in your first couple of games, right? The $1 million question, though, is can Minnesota score enough to stay in this game? That's really the big question here. Because even against lesser talents, well, let's see. First couple of games. So game 1, Nebraska won. Nebraska lost to Minnesota 13-10. Nebraska at least has a solid defense in their own right, I think. Eastern Michigan, a MAC school, though, is only 25-6. So can Minnesota score enough to remain in this game? Because we know what North Carolina is capable of, at least offensively. They're going to need at least 30-plus points. I think if Minnesota wants to have a chance to win this game in particular, and that's not going to be easy. This will be the first time that Minnesota goes on the road. Their quarterback, Afin Kalamanis, this is his first year starting. He had a stable amount of playing time last year. Wasn't great in his limited playing time. 54% completion percentage last year. 3 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. He's off to a similar start. He's going to have a big game, man. He's going to have a big game because averaging 150 yards passing per game as an offense in today's college football, the way that you can space offenses or defenses out, and the way that the penalties are skewed more towards the offense than to the defense, with the exception of false starts, of course, but it does seem like the penalties skew to favor the offense a little bit more than the defense, if that makes sense, unless you make an absolutely bonehead play. Can Minnesota score enough? That's really the $1 million question here. Now, I don't know if they can do that because they haven't done it against Eastern Michigan. They haven't done it against Nebraska either. They're only averaging 330 yards a game, guys. It's not a great look. They play ugly ball. If they want to win this game, they're going to have to make it an ugly game. They're going to have to get to Drake May. They're going to have to really make the perimeter, those perimeter guys, really make them uncomfortable. Now, we'll check in. We'll talk about what the model thinks. We'll check in what Vegas thinks right now. Again, this is as of Monday morning. Things could certainly change by the time I actually get this out. So right now, North Carolina is a 6.5-point favorite. The model has them at -12. So because of the lack of offensive production that I have seen thus far, I am leaning towards North Carolina winning this game. However, I don't know if they can I think North Carolina covers too. I'm just not a big believer of Minnesota, man. I just don't really see it. Now, PJ Fleck, he's a solid coach. I like his row to boat mentality. Knows how to connect with people. But at the end of the day, you got to have some talent. And I think North Carolina has more talent than what Minnesota has. Another team that embarrassed a SEC school, one in which we started the year off as a top 25 team in the Any Given Saturday power ratings, by the way. So I do think North Carolina wins. I do think that they also cover as well. We'll see, because I think they got their wake-up call that they're not invincible when they play against Appalachian State. I think they right the ship here. They beat Minnesota as they do get ready to go and play some ACC games, an underrated ACC conference, might I add, even with initially we are seeing Clemson being down this year based on early indications. So here we are now, barbecue on the titties. You're probably wondering what this third game is. And this third game might surprise you a little bit. It involves Texas. It does involve the Texas Longhorns. Would you guys like to know who Texas is playing next week? For those of you that maybe don't follow Texas football very closely. So it's a team that's already being a Big 12 opponent. A team that was foreseen as a dark horse to win the Big 12, possibly. We're looking at the Cowboys of Wyoming. Yes, Wyoming going on the road to take on Texas. Now, I know what some of you guys might be thinking right now as we might have a little cramp in the foot. Oh, that hurts. But screw it. We ball though. We're tough. We're built Ford tough over here. Definitely sucks though. That being said, you guys are probably wondering why I'm previewing this game. You see the lines. Texas minus 27.5 right now, according to FanDuel. The model thinks that Texas could cover it. They have them as a 40-point favorite. So why am I spending time covering this game, you're wondering? What if I told you that Wyoming is receiving votes in the AP poll right now? Would you guys know that? It's news to me. Wyoming getting some respect after winning against Texas Tech in double overtime. Now, Texas is riding high themselves. We talked about it earlier. We saw them beat Alabama on the road. And what I'm just curious about in this game more than anything is, can Texas avoid really the letdown game? Right? Because that win that Texas had last week, it's the biggest win that Texas has had in over a decade. It was a very emotional win. And we always hear at least once a year that Texas is back, allegedly. But not to be boy cry wolf here, but Texas actually might be back. There's a real chance that's actually true for the first time in over a decade. But now you got to refocus your guys. And here's the thing. It's 18 to 22-year-old guys. Mostly. We got older guys in there now. But it's still mostly 18 to 22-year-olds to the core. Can they avoid letting themselves down? Because Wyoming is not a slouch either, guys. They're really not a slouch. They beat a Texas Tech team, mind you, that ended up they beat Texas Tech. This was a team that some people were saying could win the Big 12. Like, Texas Tech was not a pushover by any means. Okay? So that's really the $1 million thing. Can they avoid that type of letdown game? Now, Texas surely has more talent than Wyoming. I don't think anyone is disputing that. But Wyoming's got some guys too. Peasley, for example, the Wyoming quarterback, 350 yards, 5 touchdowns, 1 interception. If this turns to a shootout, and listen, the over-under is at 48.5. I don't know why we have the over-under that low. I think it's in the high 50s, low 60s even. Peasley is capable of getting some points on the board for Wyoming in a heartbeat too. But I'm curious to see what's the consistency at Texas, because that's going to really separate them from being this very good program and a great program. We know that Texas bare minimum is a very good program. Okay. We see after a win against Alabama, we're going to see them in the top 25 for the rest of the season unless there's a massive collapse. But again, can Texas keep it together? They got guys on the outside. Quinn Ewers, we know what he can do. 600 yards, 6 touchdowns. Xavier Worthy, one of the most dynamic weapons in college football. Do I expect Wyoming to win this game? No, I don't. But if Texas doesn't cover, I wouldn't be the most surprised too, because it is possible that Texas could be looking ahead. I don't know what the mindset of Texas football is right now. I'm not in the locker room. But after this game, what I do know, they start Big 12 play. And what we've seen from the college football playoff, essentially, if you want to get in, you got to win your conference. If you don't win your conference, it's almost impossible to get into the college football playoff. We only seen it done a few times in the history of the 4-team playoff in that era. But what if Wyoming ends up winning, or is at least they don't win, but it's competitive? I think at that point, you got 2 Big 12 games on your schedule, 4 to non-conference. But then after that, you're almost done with non-conference play. You got 1 more against App State, which, that could be real interesting too. But after that, generally, your biggest challenge is done. You go into conference play after that. So if Wyoming wins and they just make it interesting, they make this a more competitive game. Maybe it's Texas wins, but it's a 10 to 14 point win, not a thrashing where it's close to 30 points like we saw in the opener against Rice, which shout out to Texas for not playing with food, by the way. I think Wyoming should absolutely be ranked in the top 25, even if they lose, but they lose close, because Wyoming has earned it. They have earned that opportunity if they make it close, though. But again, just want to reiterate, I think Texas wins this game too. I think we see a different level of consistency, but it's an intriguing game to watch out for sure. I'm curious to see how this goes down, because this is a night game too. This is an 8:00 matchup on the East Coast. So this is kicking off at 8 p.m. Eastern. It's on the Longhorn Network. So unless you're in the state of Texas, you're probably not going to be able to watch this game unless you know somebody that's got a stream or two. We don't condone that, but I'm not saying that you're right or wrong. I'm just saying that I understand. But yeah, I'm really curious with how that game turns out, because it could be a trap game. There is a possibility, and Wyoming is also getting points in the AP poll too. There are people out there that are voting Wyoming into their top 25. So keep that in the back of your mind, and we'll just keep soldiering on here on the Any Given Saturday podcast. But that was really all the big games that I wanted to talk about. I know it doesn't seem like the most exciting games on paper, but there's certainly some direct AP poll implications there that are involved. No denying that. There's one more thing that I wanted to do in this show tonight, and but before I get into that big thing, I want to reiterate once again. First of all, if you made it this far into the show, first of all, from the bottom of my heart, I appreciate you from really the bottom of my heart. we're closing in on an hour now. We're probably at over an hour. We don't have an exact counter, but based on the eye test, that's a buzzword, the eye test, we're probably at about an hour to this point. So if you made it this far already and you haven't done so yet, hit that like button for me, because what that's going to do, get that out to more college football people like yourself as we build this thing from the ground up. I want this to be for the people, by the people. And shoot, if you haven't done it yet, you have a real opportunity to be a day one, to be an OG of this channel, right? Being there A1 since day one, you have a real opportunity to subscribe to the channel and be one of the first subscribers of the Any Given Saturday here on YouTube. So with that little announcement out of the way, there's one more thing that I want to talk to you guys about, and I did not have a chance to do it last week. I'm a little shameful that I didn't get a chance to do so because it was going to be in my second show last week, and we couldn't get to it. You hate to see it, but we're right. We're all right over here. Life happens. It is what it is. So we got the Wendy's 4 for 4 special. Now, we brought it up in week number 1, and week number 1, we did a pretty solid job. I think we ended up going 3 for 4. We didn't get that full 4 for 4 meal that we get from Wendy's, but we did a pretty good job in terms of the betting world. This time around, we do have games on 3 different days. We have a game on Thursday between Navy and Memphis. I'll give my best bet for that Thursday game specifically, whether you pick which team to hit the spread or what looks good in terms of over under, that type of thing. We got a few more games on Friday. I'll give a best bet for Friday as well, and then we'll close it out with 2 Saturday games. So that's really the premise of the Wendy's 4 for 4 special for the week 3 edition. And without further ado, let's dive right into it. So these, what you see on screen, are my best bets for week number 3. Now, we'll start with the Thursday game in the left-hand corner. Memphis taking on the Naval Academy. It is an American Conference game. Shout out to those mid-week games, which I'm so excited to come back once we get the MAC play. We'll get weekday action. That'll be exciting to watch too. But for Thursday, in that one game, I got the Memphis Tigers winning. I have them as a 16.5 point favorite. I think they cover this. I'm not impressed with Navy's offense. I'm just not. Even when they played FCS Wagner, they only scored 24 on Wagner. So there's still a lot of work to be done for Navy's offense. I think it'll be a more dynamic offense next season. But for now, Memphis is feeling pretty good about themselves. They just tore apart Arkansas State. I think this game is at home too. That's another caveat as well. We'll do a discount double check real quick to make sure that's actually true. I don't want to give you bad information, especially when it comes to betting. You know, you guys have money on the line. Okay, so Memphis is at home, okay? So Memphis is at home against Navy. Right now, as of Monday morning, it is a 16.5 point favorite. I really like that line at 16.5 right now. As for Friday, I'm going to the opposite side of the country. I'm looking at that Utah State and Air Force game. Now, neither of these teams seem to have the most dynamic offenses. Utah State, yeah, they put up a lot of points, but it's Idaho State. I don't know if Idaho State is actually any good or not. And when we saw them against a real FBS team, they only put up 2 touchdowns. Air Force last week, they won, but Air Force very shaky on offense. They scored 13 against a team that's also making its transition to the FBS level. And look, maybe Sam Houston State is one of those teams that's fundamentally sound defensively. They held BYU to 14, just Sam Houston hasn't figured out a way to put it in the end zone. Either way, right now is a Monday morning. The line is at 46.5 in terms of the over-under. I'm going under here because I'm not convinced by either of those 2 offenses. Speaking of offenses that I'm not very convinced about, I do also have the under for Florida Atlantic at Clemson as of Monday morning. This is at 52.5. Florida, I think this is the type of game. I'm not sold on Clemson's offense, bro. I'm just not there. Yes, they put up 60 points against Charleston Southern, but I'm not there. I'm not convinced that Clemson puts up a ton of points 2 weeks in a row. And then simultaneously, I have more belief in their defense than say what they had in the Duke game, right? I think the Duke game really harbored expectations down a little bit, but I still believe in that defense. I don't think Florida Atlantic is going to score that much. And while I think Clemson is going to ultimately cover, like from a spreads perspective, I don't think there's as many points as I think people think there's going to be. I would go under here too. And to round it out to keep in for the Saturday best bets, I'm looking at Kentucky. Kentucky right now, they are going to play the University of Akron. Akron last week, they barely beat FCS Morgan State. Kentucky didn't look great either, 28-17, but here's the big premise in this, okay? Ball State, they played Ball State week number 1, and they blew out Ball State by 30 points. We did see that happen too. I think Ball State is better than the Akron Zips. That's just where I am right now. They have more experience. And I think that Eastern Kentucky game is going to be a wake-up call more than anything. While Akron is just excited to have a win this year. So I think Kentucky's going to blow out Akron. Give me what's reported as of Monday morning. Give me that minus 24.5. And that, my friends, is going to wrap up that Wendy's 4 for 4 special that I have for week number 3. And that's kind of my reasoning behind that. But guys, that is going to go ahead and wrap things up for tonight. Only one show this week, so I'll be spending some time getting ready to, take a look at the fantasy football teams and just getting geared up for another great weekend of college football. Again, appreciate you guys listening to the whole show. If you made it all the way, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe button, like I talked about multiple times earlier, because you have a real opportunity to be a foundational part of this community and do so in a positive way as well. But until then, I am your host, Jake, and I am going to sign off for tonight. Hope you guys are all out there having a good one. Take care, everybody.